Keme, tell us about yourself.
So I am a journalist, and I'm making a film, a feature film about my family and a discovery that I made not long before I connected with you. My mother, her maiden name is Rinehart. She is American. She's a white American. And my father is Nigerian. We're Igbo. Nzerem is an Igbo name. We're from the southeast of Nigeria. And I have lived all over the world, but I grew up pretty much in the UK with a few stints in the States. So I kind of feel like I belong to lots of different places, you know. But my sense of identity was really rocked a few years ago. I grew up as a mixed but very proud Black guy. And I had never really thought, I never had to think about the thing that I discovered. Mm-hmm. Because I discovered that my white American ancestors had been slave owners. And they had enslaved Africans. And it really, really turned my world upside down, because it made me begin to question so much about who I was. And I started on a journey, which is where my path met yours, because I decided very early on, having discovered, because my uncle had sent me some documents, a will from 1829 that revealed the names of these people that my ancestors had owned. And it still makes my skin prickle to think that such a thing happened, that we did that. I realized I needed to do something more than just know this, and began a journey to try and find the descendants of the people that my white ancestors had enslaved.
That's really, when you think about someone looking for descendants that their family owned, that puts you in a very strange position.
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, would the descendants want to know you?
And, Bernice, I would absolutely understand and accept it, and expect many people to not want to have anything to do with me and my family, because why would people necessarily want to relive and surface that trauma? But on the other hand, I sincerely hope that for some people, there may be use in connecting, not necessarily with me, but with the information that I can share. And that is the beginning for me of a very deep and broad conversation about somehow moving on from what happened, which in the broadest sense, I guess, is what we might call reparations. And takes many forms. And I'm just beginning this journey, and I really want to respect and honor wherever other people are on their journey, because it's not for me to say how people are dealing with their own sense of family and identity. But yeah, it's very challenging for me, actually, going through that process.
Right. Now, you mentioned when we first started that we met in Edgefield, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And so there was a reason for you to go to Edgefield. So tell us about that whole experience of actually going to the place where your ancestors were from.
Yeah, I knew that the documents that I had received were housed in the Edgefield archives, because that is where my family had settled. That is where the Rineharts who left Germany in the 1750s had settled. And the reason you and I connected is because of your expertise in Edgefield and this incredible resource that we have in Edgefield, which is the archives. And for those of you that are watching this, the Edgefield archives are a remarkable repository, partly because that town, the town of Edgefield, wasn't destroyed during the Civil War. So a lot of documents that perhaps would have been destroyed in other places still exist. And the people of Edgefield, whatever their background, whatever their views on history, on right, wrong, Confederacy versus North, whatever, what they have realized is that the documents that they hold are really important to everybody, to all Americans, in fact, to all the world, which is why I wanted to go to Edgefield to find out what I could find out. Would it even be possible with the documentary evidence that I knew I had to begin to trace forwards from 1829, which was the date on the will, the enslaved people? Would it be possible to trace from 1829 to the present day, which of course is the very opposite of the journey that many of you watching this might be embarking on, because lots of Black Americans, lots of Americans have up-to-date information now, but they want to know, well, how did we get here? So we're kind of intersecting, you know. And what was really special about my trip to Edgefield, as well as meeting you, is I met up with one of my cousins who doesn't live that far away. He lives in Atlanta. He grew up in DC, but he moved to Atlanta recently. And he agreed to go on some of this journey with me. As well as looking at the archives and the documents, we started to look at places that were significant to our family. And there is a family cemetery. There's a Rinehart family cemetery that we wanted to visit. And it was hidden away, and we didn't quite know how to find it, because, you know, it goes back to the early 1800s. And we found it, and we were absolutely deeply moved, actually, by what we found there. Partly because we were also, of course, looking for any evidence that we might be able to find of memorials to the enslaved. Because as we know, oftentimes enslaved people were not given the honor and the dignity and the humanity of what you might call a decent or proper burial. But nonetheless, there may have been evidence there. We didn't know what to find. And I want to just show you, if you don't mind, a short clip that we filmed from our visit to the cemetery that will form part of the film that we're making. It's me and my cousin, my brilliant, beautiful cousin, SJ, who is not necessarily someone you would expect to be interested in a topic like this. So I'm just going to share my screen and play the film, if you don't mind. So hopefully you'll see it there, and I'm going to press play. Here we go.
I would suspect that was somebody that came back later.
Yeah.
Somebody that loved this person, carved initials on it.
You know, it's really interesting, because this journey for me, really, it's about finding the living.
Yeah.
But we find ourselves having to look here for clues, because what matters to me is what happened to their descendants. Where are their sixth generation, which is what we are, to John Rinehart? Where are they now? What are they doing, and what kind of lives did they end up leaving?
Well, where do we go next?
We'll find them. You know, and it's a journey that kind of scares me, because I don't know what I'll find at the other end. You know, I want to think that ultimately the descendants of the people that our family owned, that ultimately they ended up being able to shake off the shackles. But until I trace those journeys and find out, I won't know. I think, I don't know. Am I crazy trying to do this?
No, I told you before you're not crazy. I told you before. But this is where you have to start.
Wow, that's some powerful stuff, right?
Yeah, and it it does scare me, Bernice,
Mhm.
because we were part of something that was terrible.
Yes. And you wonder, by connecting with the descendants, their reaction, because you're talking about something terrible.
Mm,
And you're doing a kind of reverse genealogy because, as you said, they have the present, but they may not have gone back as far as your documents um, are revealing the names of their ancestors. So there's an education process that needs to take place on both sides. Your
mm,
side with the research, bringing those people that you have identified in those records up to, let's say, 1870. And for the descendants, let's see if we could get them back to 1870. But I understand, what you're talking about. As you know, I did connect with the slave owner descendant of my family.
yeah.
And it expanded my research beyond what I had ever imagined. Because at the time of my search, I was not searching for my enslaved ancestors. I was just searching for my ancestors and searching for the living. But when I had that experience, it was a shock to connect with the descendant.
I'm
It
sure it was.
was. I didn't know how to react, especially seeing my ancestor's name with a price tag,
Mm,
with the furniture and other items and other people, which is similar to the documents that you have. You don't just have one name, you have several names. And so, why don't you share with us some of those names just so that people can get an understanding of you? You know, there are names on this document. It's not just boy, age 50. No, there's a name.
that's right. The two names that I first read about were contained in a haunting phrase in that 1829 will. I bequeath to my wife 2 Negroes, namely Cato and Tack, which we now know was a misspelling. It was actually Jack. I bequeath to my wife 2 Negroes, namely Cato and Jack, and this is to your point, 50 bushels of corn. And it's the simplistic reduction of those two human beings to property with a cold value that could be traded and discarded just cuts to the bottom of all of this.
Yes.
But look, that said, and I know that many people watching this and involved in this process of research are going through their own journey of processing what this means. There is a research journey to be done nonetheless. There were many, many other names that we discovered, many first names. And we began, obviously, thinking that Rinehart, which is my mother's maiden name and the name of my fourth great grandfather, would be the key to tracing people for obvious reasons. Now, of course, that may change. Many people upon emancipation, so to speak, the first thing they wanted to do was change their name, because why would they want to be associated with this history? Other people kept it, that's fine. People may have escaped. People may have bought their own freedom. There are many reasons that may require us to expand the search away from the name Rinehart as a key to my search. And we got a very big clue, actually, with the help of the archivist at Edgefield, Tonya Browder. She found a fascinating document. And when I say fascinating, that is also respecting the trauma that lies herein, but just speaking purely as a researcher, as an historian, as a genealogist, we can get excited about documents, even though they may contain pain, right? Yes. When my fourth great grandfather was on his, when he died, and he passed the document, his property, onto his wife, Catherine Rinehart, she remarried shortly after. Now, as we know, back in the 1820s, women had very few rights as well. And it would have been typical for all of a woman's property to be transferred to the male that she then married. But my fourth great grandmother, Catherine Rinehart, although she was in fact technically John Rinehart's second wife, therefore not my blood ancestor, but nonetheless, she wrote the equivalent of a prenup, mandating that the enslaved people that she had inherited from my fourth great grandfather stay in her blood family. So there are layers and layers to this around equality, and gender plays a massive role here too. But what we learned in this prenup was that the enslaved people, Cato, Jack, and a number of other individuals, Sally, Pricey, and all her not yet born children, were to be kept by Catherine Rinehart's children. And their names are really important, because their surnames may be the people that I'm looking for.
That's correct.
And those surnames are, I would say Kinard, K-I-N-A-R-D, but in Edgefield and environs, it is often pronounced Kynard. You may have another pronunciation, but the spelling is K-I-N-A-R-D, because William and Frederick Kynard were Catherine's sons. Also, her grandson, Noah Kaufman, C-A-U-G-H-M-A-N, which is sometimes spelt differently, C-O-R-F-M-A-N. So suddenly, I find myself realizing that, as well as Rinehart, African-American Rineharts, we may well be looking for African-American Kynards or Kaufmans. And that change would have happened, we think, in the 1830s. So as you can see, and as you know well, tracing this lineage is painstaking and is document by document. And anybody watching this who, for whom those names resonate, if you're an African-American Kynard from the Edgefield area, Saluda,
or even
I
Newbury,
sincerely,
for that matter.
Newbury, hey, and look, I mean, you know what? It could even be Alaska. Could have moved to Fiji for all I know, right?
That's right.
But with connections to that part of the world, I sincerely hope that what I've talked about might be of interest to you. And at whatever level you're interested in connecting, I would be really, really grateful if we could do that.
Also, let me just ask you, because there's also another surname, and that's Wise.
Correct.
So you're looking at Kiner or Kennard, Kaufman, Wise, and also Rinehart.
Correct. Catherine Rinehart, the woman who inherited quote unquote the enslaved people, married John Wise. John Wise actually passed before she did. Because of the prenup, in theory, the paperwork suggests that those enslaved people would not have been transferred, quote unquote, to John Wise. But hey, you know, we all know lawyers, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of where I've been looking at, and I know a lot of your work, Bernice, in helping me has been looking through your own understanding of trees and how they work, and trying to start with the now, whereas I've been looking back in the day. But we have another challenge, of course, because my real ambition with this project is that I can encourage other people, other families, to look into their past and understand how their relationship with the enslavement of African people has created the now. And for me to do that in film form, you saw the emotion that SJ and I genuinely felt in the cemetery. For me, this has to be a journey film. And without going too much into the detail of how we make a film like this, I have to kind of be kept in the dark from a lot of the revelations. And so it's been so useful to be working with you, Bernice, so you can be that first point of contact for people that might be interested in this journey. Because if people contact me, which ultimately I hope they will, it means that when we film stuff, that those crucial early moments of surprise and jeopardy are lost, because we will have already developed a relationship via Zoom or via email or phone. So all of you watching, my sincere hope is, should you want to connect, that you connect with Bernice in the first instance, and we can begin to figure out how, in the next few months and years, when we're allowed to travel again, we can arrange it so that we can meet and genuinely explore this shared history together on camera, because we want the film to be really powerful, because we want other people to be able to take this journey on. So it's a slightly unusual way of conducting genealogical research.
And, one of the expectations is that if an individual thinks that they are connected, that when we talk, not you, but when I talk to them, I will be asking questions about their family history. And in some cases, they may not have gone as far as perhaps they need to, but we'll go through that whole conversation about, why do you think this is a connecting link to your family? And by the time we get to the point where we can actually get back to your documents, we hope that this is the point where everyone understands you are going to connect with the correct person. So it's fluid.
It is.
It's emotional.
It is.
Understand that. And it's a journey. And I understand for many people, this may be a challenge.
It will be a challenge.
Right. Because you have to also examine, do you really want to make that connection?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, but this year of all years, I think, has taught us that this is a discussion that wherever we are in the world, whether it's here in the UK, where I'm talking to you from now, where people are still, you know, you speak to the average British person and ask them about Britain's involvement with enslavement of Africans, and the common response is, well, didn't Britain end the slave trade? And it's like, well, actually, Britain invented it, created it, and profited. Britain is Britain because of the riches, human and mineral, that it plundered.
Mhm.
Actually, the conversation is much more advanced in the States. I think we Americans are you know, there are many entrenched positions, and there are many very influential people, soon to be less influential, giving succor to white supremacists who are not interested really in a brighter future. But even when I look at and this is something that I want to share in just a little bit more detail in a second, when I think about my Nigerian brothers and sisters, you know, we Nigerians are still sadly looking to perhaps blame one ethnic group over another for involvement in abducting and kidnapping people in the first place, which is another conversation and very complex, and something that also pains me deeply, because there's something else I need to share with you watching. There have long been stories that I've heard about my Nigerian ancestors, that our clan, our wider clan, we were merchants. The Arrow people from southeastern Nigeria were merchants. We bought and sold stuff, which meant that we were quite a powerful kingdom. And one of the things we sold was people. Now, I absolutely don't believe in there being a moral equivalence between the enslavement of people in the Caribbean and Brazil and the States and the kidnap that took place in the first place. But it was, you know, one was absolutely genocidal, and the other was a corruption of domestic enslavement or a caste system that, whilst it wasn't fair and I wouldn't support it, was categorically not the same thing. But it was a system, and we are all part of that system. And understanding and acknowledging how that all linked together is really important for me. Part of this journey for me has been going back with my dad to find out just how close our Nigerian family were connected to this wider system. And you know, it's been quite a difficult journey for me on that side as well.
I can imagine your family, both sides.
Involved in one way or another, or at least connected.
Yes. Yeah. So while you are looking for individuals on your maternal side, what about your paternal side?
So there is technically, there is a possibility. And whether we could ever find this out for sure is very hard to know. What we do know is that the vast majority of the people who were trafficked from Calabar, which was the closest port to our part of Nigeria, the vast majority of the people trafficked by the British from Calabar, well, guess where they were headed? They were headed to Charleston, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. So there is a very, very poignant and sad link for me that it is possible that the people that were kidnapped and abducted by our clan, possibly with some kind of loose family connection, we don't think it was very strong, but there was a connection, those individuals may have ended up being enslaved, or their offspring being enslaved by some of my white ancestors. And that makes me, I don't know how it makes me feel, but it doesn't make me feel great.
It's not supposed to. That's just to think that on both sides,
Mm.
who could feel great? Nobody. I mean, this is a very, very difficult situation, but it is part of your family history. Just as, unfortunately, for many African Americans, they have the enslavement piece that's part of their family history. It does not define who they are, but certainly they do know that some of their ancestors were enslaved.
And you're absolutely right. While it's part of my history, it is also part of other people's histories. And I sincerely hope that the information that I have access to might be helpful to others in and of itself, and furthermore, useful to everybody, because I want all of us to be having this conversation about how we are all connected and how we can understand each other better and how we can move forward.
Absolutely. So, what's next?
The next stage for me, with your help, Bernice, and for those of you who are watching this, is to try and find 3 or 4 families who are directly connected to the people that my white family had enslaved back in the 1800s. Once we've found 3 or 4 families who are willing to take part in this, who tell a broad sweep of American life, of African American life, the successes, the challenges, the brutal realities. I'm not looking for I'm not looking for 3 super high achieving families where everything is great. By the same token, I'm not looking for 3 families where things are just 100% rough, because that is not an accurate reflection of who we are. There are triumphs and beauties and glories and challenges and absolute terrible difficulties in everybody's lives. And I want to find people who are happy and willing to talk about the broad reality. And we trace back how our families were connected from 1829 to now. And we have that discussion about, well, where do we go from here? What is reparation? Is it something that we as a society need to deal with, or are there individual acts as well? And I don't know how I'm going to react, because I don't know how people will react to me. All I can do is say I come with an open heart and positive intent.
And that's certainly something that people may be receptive to, that positive intent. And you will hear their freedom story, their survival story. And you most likely will get a range of stories. And so I would like to just give folks my contact information so that they can follow up with me. And I can be reached at Jeannie B4 at Verizon.net. That's Jeannie with a G, ENIE number 4 at Verizon.net. So thank you so much, Keme.
Thank you, Bernice. Thank you so much for your help, your guidance, your support, and your brilliance. I really couldn't be doing this without you.
Well, thank you for your honesty, for your willingness to search and to share information about your family. This is something that we all wish for, and we seek that information that you have. And so your willingness to share is what we want, and certainly to share it in a film for others to see is inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching, everyone.